The Los Angeles Kings are a professional ice hockey team based in Los Angeles, California. They are members of the Pacific Division of the Western Conference of the National Hockey League. The team was founded on February 9, 1966, when Jack Kent Cooke was awarded an NHL expansion franchise for Los Angeles, becoming one of the 6 teams that began play as part of the 1967 NHL expansion. The Kings called the Forum in Inglewood, California, the home for 32 years until they moved to the Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles to start the 1999-2000 season. During the 1970s and early 1980s, the Kings had many years marked by impressive play in the regular season only to be washed out by early playoff exits. The highlights included the strong goaltending of Rogie Vachon, and the Triple Crown line of Charlie Simmer, Dave Taylor and Hall of Fame player Marcel Dion, who had a famous upset of the uprising Edmonton Oilers in a 1982 playoff game known as the Miracle on Manchester. In 1988, the Kings traded with the Oilers to get their captain Wayne Gretzky, leading to a successful phase of the franchise that raised hockey's popularity in Los Angeles. Gretzky, fellow Hall of Famer Luc Robitaille and defenseman Rob Blake led the Kings to the franchise's sole division title in 1990-91, and the Kings' first Stanley Cup final in 1993. After the 1993 finals, the Kings entered financial problems, with a bankruptcy in 1995 that was only solved after the franchise was acquired by Philip Anschutz and Edward P. Roski. A period of mediocrity ensued, with the Kings only resurging as they broke a 6-year playoff drought in the 2009-10 season, with a team that included goaltender Jonathan Quick, defenseman Drew Doughty, and forwards Dustin Brown, Hans Kopitar and Justin Williams. Under coach Darryl Sutter, who was hired early in the 2011-12 season, the Kings have won 2 Stanley Cups in 3 years: 2012 over the New Jersey Devils, and 2014 against the New York Rangers. Quick and Williams respectively won the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player of the playoffs. Franchise history. When the NHL decided to expand for the 1967-68 season amid rumblings that the Western Hockey League was proposing to turn itself into a major league and compete for the Stanley Cup, Canadian entrepreneur Jack Kent Cooke paid the NHL $2 million to place one of the 6 expansion teams in Los Angeles. Following a fan contest to name the team, Cooke chose the name Kings because he wanted his club to take on an air of royalty, and picked the original team colors of purple and gold because they were colors traditionally associated with royalty. The same color scheme was worn by the Los Angeles Lakers of the National Basketball Association, which Cooke also owned. Cooke wanted his new NHL team to play in the Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena, home of the Lakers, but the Los Angeles Coliseum Commission, which manages the sports arena and the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum to the present day, had already entered into an agreement with the WHL's Los Angeles Blades to play the games at the sports arena. Frustrated by his dealings with the Coliseum Commission, Cooke said, "I'm going to build my own arena. I've had enough of this balderdash." Construction on Cooke's new arena, the Forum, was not yet complete when the 1967-68 season began, so the Kings opened the first season at the Long Beach Arena in the neighboring city of Long Beach on October 14, 1967, defeating another expansion team, the Philadelphia Flyers, 4-2. The fabulous Forum finally opened its doors on December 30, 1967, with the Kings being shut out by the Flyers, 2-0. while the first two seasons had the Kings qualifying for the playoffs. Afterwards, poor management led the Kings into hard times. The general managers established a history of trading away first-round draft picks, usually for veteran players, and attendance suffered during this time. Eventually the Kings made two key acquisitions to resurge as a contender, by acquiring Toronto Maple Leafs winger Bob Pulford, who would later become the Kings head coach in 1970, and Montreal Canadiens goaltender Rogie Vachon in 1971. The Kings went from being one of the worst defensive teams in the league to one of the best, and in 1974 they returned to the playoffs, after being eliminated in the first round of the playoffs in both 1973-74 and 1974-75. The Kings moved to significantly upgrade their offensive firepower when they acquired center Marcel Dionne from the Detroit Red Wings. Behind Dionne's offensive prowess, the strong goaltending of Rogie Vachon, and the speed and scoring touch of forward Butch Goring, the Kings played two of the most thrilling seasons yet, with playoff matchups against the then Atlanta Flames in the first round, and the Boston Bruins in the second round, both times being eliminated by Boston. Bob Pulford left the Kings after the 1976-77 season after constant feuding with then-owner Jack Kent Cooke, and general manager Jake Milford decided to leave as well. This led to struggles in the 1977-78 season, where the Kings finished below .500 and were easily swept out of the first round by the Maple Leafs. Afterwards, Vachon would become a free agent and sign with the Detroit Red Wings. The following season, Kings coach Bob Berry tried juggling line combinations, and Dionne found himself on a new line with two young, mostly unknown players, second-year right-winger Dave Taylor and left-winger Charlie Simmer, who had been a career minor leaguer. Each player benefited from each other, with Simmer being the gritty player who battled along the boards, Taylor being the playmaker, and Dionne being the natural goal scorer. This line combination, known as the Triple Crown line, would go on to become one of the highest-scoring line combinations in NHL history. During the first three seasons of the Triple Crown line, a period where Jerry Buss purchased the Kings, the Lakers, and the Forum for $67.5 million, the Kings were eliminated in the first round. Then in the 1982 Stanley Cup playoffs, a Kings team that finished 17th overall and 4th in the division with 63 points, managed to upset the second overall Edmonton Oilers, led by the young Wayne Gretzky, with 2 victories in Edmonton and 1 at the Forum, dubbed Miracle on Manchester, where the Kings managed to erase a 5-0 deficit at the third period and eventually win in overtime. The Kings managed to eliminate the vaunted Oilers, but they wound up eliminated by eventual finalists Vancouver Canucks in 5 games. Despite Dionne's leadership, the Kings missed the playoffs in the next 2 seasons. A postseason return occurred in 1984-85 under coach Pat Quinn, where the Kings were quickly swept out of the playoffs by the Oilers in the second straight Stanley Cup championship. After a losing season in 1985-86, the Kings saw 2 important departures during 1986-87, as Quinn signed a contract in December to become coach and general manager of the Vancouver Canucks with just months left on his Kings contract. eventually being suspended by NHL president John Ziegler for creating a conflict of interest, and Dion left the franchise in March in a trade to the New York Rangers. Despite these shocks, a young squad that would lead the Kings into the next decade, including star forwards Bernie Nichols, Jimmy Carson, Luc Robitaille, and defenseman Steve Duchesne, started to flourish under head coach Mike Murphy, who played 13 seasons with the Kings and was the captain for 7 years, and his replacement Robbie Foote. The Kings made the playoffs for 2 seasons, but they were unable to get out of the first round given the playoff structuring forced them to play either the Oilers of the equally powerful Calgary Flames en route to the conference finals. In all, the Kings faced either the Oilers of the Flames in the playoffs 4 times during the 1980s. However, the 1988-89 season would be a big turning point for the franchise. In 1987, coin collector Bruce McNall purchased the Kings from Buss and turned the team into a Stanley Cup contender almost overnight. On August 9, 1988, McNall acquired the league's best player, Wayne Gretzky, in a blockbuster trade with the Edmonton Oilers. The trade rocked the hockey world, especially north of the border where Canadians mourned the loss of a player they considered national treasure. McNall changed the team colors to silver and black. Gretzky's arrival generated much excitement about hockey and the NHL in Southern California, and the ensuing popularity of the Kings is credited with the arrival of another team in the region, the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim, and the NHL's expanding and moving into other Sun Belt cities such as Dallas, Phoenix, Tampa, Miami and Nashville. In Gretzky's first season with the Kings, he led the team in scoring with 168 points on 54 goals and 114 assists, and won his 9th Hart Memorial Trophy as the league's most valuable player. The 4th overall Kings eliminated Gretzky's old team, the Oilers, in the first round of the 1989 playoffs, before being swept out of the playoffs in the second round by the eventual Stanley Cup champion Flames. Clashes between Gretzky and head coach Robbie Foote led to his dismissal, replaced by Tom Webster. The next season, where Gretzky became the league's all-time leading scorer, was the inverse of its predecessor, with the Kings eliminating the defending champion Flames before falling to the eventual champion Oilers. Gretzky spearheaded the Kings to the first regular season division title in franchise history in the 1990-91 season, but the heavily favored Kings lost a close series against Edmonton in the second round that saw 4 games go into overtime. After the third straight elimination by the Oilers in 1992, Tom Webster was relieved from head coach, and general manager Rogie Vachon was moved to a different position in the organization and named Nick Beverly as his successor. Beverly hired coach Barry Melrose, then at the Adirondack Red Wings. Melrose would help the Kings reach new heights in the 1992-93 season, even if Gretzky missed 39 games with a career-threatening herniated thoracic disc. Led by Luc Robitaille, who filled in as captain on Gretzky's absence, the Kings finished with a 3-9-3-5-1-0 record, clinching third place in the Smythe Division. Heavily contested series at the 1993 playoffs had the Kings eliminating the Flames, Canucks and Leafs en route to the first berth in the Stanley Cup Finals. In the 1993 Stanley Cup Finals, the Kings faced the Montreal Canadiens. After winning the opening match 4-1, the Kings suffered a turnaround during Game 2. Late in the contest, with the Kings leading by a score of 2-1, Canadiens coach Jack Demers requested a measurement of Kings defenseman Marty McSorley's stick blade. His suspicions proved to be correct, as the curve of blade was too great, and McSorley was penalized. The Canadiens pulled their goalie, Patrick Roy, giving them a two-man advantage, and Eric Desjardins scored on the resulting power play to tie the game. Montreal went on to win the game in overtime on another goal by Desjardins, and the Kings never recovered. They dropped the next two games in overtime, and lost Game 5, 4-1, giving the Canadiens the 24th Stanley Cup in franchise history. The next chapter after the 1993 playoff run for the Kings was tough for Kings fans. Having a sluggish start on 1993-94 season cost them a playoff berth, the first absence from the postseason since 1986. At the same time, McNall defaulted on a loan from Bank of America, who threatened to force the Kings into bankruptcy unless he sold the team. McNall sold the team to IDB Communications founder Jeffrey Sudakoff and former Madison Square Garden president Joseph Cohen in the wake of a federal investigation into his financial practices. It later emerged that McNall's free-spending ways put the Kings in serious financial trouble. At one point, Cohen and Sudakoff were even unable to meet player payroll, and were ultimately forced into bankruptcy in 1995. They were forced to trade many of the stronger players, and the middling results led to Gretzky's departure in 1996 as he requested a trade for legitimate Stanley Cup contender, and went to the St. Louis Blues. On October 6, 1995, one day before the 1995-96 season opener, the bankruptcy court approved the purchase of the Kings by Philip Anschutz and Edward P. Roski for $113.5 million. The subsequent rebuild had the Kings only return to the playoffs in 1998, led by captain Rob Blake and strong players Joseph Stumple and Glenn Murray, where the highly skilled St. Louis Blues swept the team in 4 games. The Kings suffered though an 1998-99 injury-plagued season as they finished last in the Pacific Division and missed the playoffs with a 3-2-4-5-5 record, leading to the dismissal of head coach Larry Robinson. The Kings, along with the Los Angeles Lakers, made an even bigger move in 1999 as they left the Forum after 32 seasons, and moved to the Staples Center in downtown Los Angeles, which was built by Anschutz and Roski. Staples Center was a state-of-the-art arena, complete with luxury suites and all the modern amenities that fans and athletes would want in a brand new facility. With a new home, a new coach, a potential 50-goal scorer in the fold, and players such as Rob Blake, Luc Robitaille, Glenn Murray, Joseph Stumple, Donald Audette, Ian LePerriere and Matthias Nordstrom, the Kings improved dramatically, finishing the season the 1999-2000 season with a 3-9-3-1-1-2-4 record, good for second place in the Pacific Division. But in the 2000 playoffs, the Kings were once again eliminated in the first round, this time by the Detroit Red Wings in a 4-game sweep. The 2001 season was a controversial one, as fans began to question AEG's commitment to the success of the Kings because they failed to significantly improve the team during the off-season. Adding fuel to the fire was the February 21, 2001, trade of star defenseman and fan favorite Rob Blake to the Colorado Avalanche. Despite this, 2 players gotten in the deal, right-wing Adam Deadmarsh and defenseman Aaron Miller, became impact players for the Kings, who finished the 2001 season with a 3-8-2-8-1-3-3 record, good for a third-place finish in the Pacific Division and another first-round playoff date with the Detroit Red Wings. The heavily favored Red Wings suffered an upset, losing in 6 games for the Kings' first playoff series win since 1993. In the second round, the Kings forced 7 games in the series against the Avalanche but lost to the eventual Stanley Cup champions. Afterwards, during the off-season, Luc Robitaille turned down a 1-year deal with a substantial pay cut and ended up signing with Detroit, as the Red Wings represented his best chance at winning the Stanley Cup, unlike Thomas Sandstrom before him in 1997. Robitaille won the Stanley Cup with Detroit in 2002. The Kings started off the season with a sluggish October and November, and then found the game again to finish with 95 points. They in fact were tied in points with the second-place Phoenix Coyotes, and only finished third in the Pacific Division and seventh in the West due to a goals for differential, the Coyotes having 228 and the Kings having 214 as a team. In the playoffs, they met the Colorado Avalanche once again, this time in the first round. The series would prove to be a carbon copy of the previous meeting, with the Kings behind 3-1 and bouncing back to tie the series, only to be dominated in the 7th game and eliminated. The next seasons would be major disappointments as the Kings hit another major decline, missing the postseason up until 2009-10, where the team had built a consistent roster with goalie Jonathan Quick, defenseman Drew Doughty, and forwards Dustin Brown, Hans Kopitar and Justin Williams, finishing 6th overall in the West with 101 points, just the third 100-plus point season in franchise history, and establishing a franchise record with a 9-game unbeaten streak. The Kings returned to the playoffs, where they lost to a highly skilled Vancouver Canucks team in 6 games. The Kings entered the 2011 playoffs as the 7th seed in the West and played San Jose in the first round. Despite Hans Kopitar's absence with injury, the Kings pushed the series to 7 games until an overtime goal by Joe Thornton qualified the Sharks. A bad start to the 2011-12 season resulted in coach Terry Murray being fired, with Darryl Sutter being chosen as his replacement. The Kings were much improved under Sutter, finishing with the 8th seed, having rounded out the season with a 4-0-2-7-1-5 record for 95 points. The Kings then headed into the 2012 playoffs against the President's Trophy-winning Vancouver Canucks. After playing 2 games in Vancouver and 1 in Los Angeles, the Kings were up 3-0 in the series, a franchise first. By winning Game 5 in Vancouver, the Kings advanced to the conference semi-finals for the first time since the 2001 season, whereupon they swept the second-seeded St. Louis Blues, advancing to the Western Conference Finals for only the second time in franchise history. In doing so, the Kings also became the first NHL team to enter the playoffs as the 8th seed and eliminate the first and second-seeded teams in the conference. They then defeated Phoenix in 5 games to reach the finals, culminating in an overtime goal by Dustin Penner in Game 5, and thus becoming the second team in NHL history to beat the top 3 conference seeds in the playoffs and the first 8th seed to accomplish the feat. Los Angeles faced the New Jersey Devils in the final, defeating them in 6 games to win the first Stanley Cup in franchise history, with the Game 6 victory occurring on home ice at Staples Center. The Kings became the first team since the 2007 Anaheim Ducks to win the Stanley Cup at home, as well as the second Californian NHL team to do so. The Kings became the first 8th-seed champion in any of the North American major leagues, the first Stanley Cup champion that finished below 5th in its conference, and the third to finish below 2nd in its division. Goaltender Jonathan Quick was awarded the Conn Smythe Trophy as the most valuable player during the playoffs, and soon after signed a 10-year contract extension on June 28. Due to the 2012-13 NHL lockout, the 2012-13 Los Angeles Kings season began on January 19, 2013, and was shortened to 48 games. The Kings finished the season as the 5th seed in the West and began the defense of the Cup on the road against the St. Louis Blues, who they swept in the 2012 playoffs. After losing the first 2 games, the Kings won 4 in a row to eliminate the Blues in 6 games. In the second round, they then played a very tough San Jose Sharks team, this time with home ice advantage. In the first game, Jarrett Stoll suffered an injury from the Sharks' Rafi Torres, who ended up being suspended for the rest of the series. The Kings eventually won in 7 games. In the Western Conference Finals, they faced the number 1 seed in the West and President's Trophy winner, the Chicago Blackhawks. After dropping the first 2 games, the Kings won Game 3 with Jeff Carter suffering an injury from Blackhawks defenseman Duncan Keith, who was suspended for Game 4 as a result. After losing Game 4, the Kings battled the Blackhawks through 2 overtime periods in Game 5, with Patrick Kane eventually scoring the game-winning goal that won the game and the series, sending the Blackhawks to the 2013 Stanley Cup Finals and ending the Kings season. During the 2013-14 season, the Kings acquired Marian Gaborik, and qualified for the 5th straight playoffs with the 6th best result of the West. In the first round of the 2014 playoffs, the Kings played their in-state rivals, the San Jose Sharks. After losing the first 3 games to the Sharks, the Kings became the 4th team in NHL history to win the final 4 games in a row after initially being down 3 games to none, beating the Sharks in San Jose in the deciding Game 7. In the second round, the Kings played another in-state rival, Anaheim. After starting the series with 2 wins, the Kings lost 3 straight games, trailing the series 3 games to 2. For the second time in the first 2 rounds of the playoffs, however, the Kings were able to rally back after being down in the series and defeated the Ducks in Anaheim in Game 7. In the third round, the Kings jumped out to a 3-1 lead against Stanley Cup defending Chicago, but were unable to close out the series in the 5th and 6th games. On June 1, 2014, the Kings advanced to the Stanley Cup Finals for the second time in 3 years after winning Game 7, 4-3, in overtime via a goal from Alec Martinez, clinching the 3rd Western Conference title in franchise history. The Kings became the first team in NHL history to win 3 Game 7s en route to a Stanley Cup Finals berth. Not only were the Kings the first team in history to accomplish this feat, they also managed to win all Game 7s on opposing ice. For the 3rd time, the Kings were finalists after finishing 3rd in the division and 6th lower in their conference. In the final, the Kings faced the Eastern Conference winning New York Rangers, who had defeated the Montreal Canadiens in 6 games in the Eastern Finals. The Kings won the Stanley Cup in 5 games, culminating with an Alec Martinez goal in the second overtime of Game 5 at Staples Center. The championship run had a record 26 playoff games, with the Kings facing elimination a record 7 times. With the Game 7 victory in the conference finals and wins in the first 2 games of the Cup Finals, they became the first team to win 3 consecutive playoff games after trailing by more than 1 goal in each game. Justin Williams, who scored twice in the finals and had points in all 3 Game 7s throughout the playoffs, won the Conn Smythe Trophy as playoff MVP. Having won 2 Stanley Cup championships in the last 3 years, the Kings entered the 2014-15 season as the early favourites to retain the title. However, the Kings struggled often, with scoring slumps, defencemen losing games to injury and suspensions, and frequent road losses. A defeat to the Calgary Flames in the penultimate game of the season eliminated the Kings from playoff contention, while qualifying Calgary, which coincidentally missed the postseason during the Kings' 5-season playoff streak. Despite finishing with a record of 4-0-2-7-1-5, the Kings became the first defending Stanley Cup champion to miss the postseason since the 2006-07 Carolina Hurricanes, and only the 4th overall since the 1967 NHL expansion season. At the start of the 2015-16 season, the Kings were expected to make the playoffs. They entered the playoffs as the 5th seeded in their conference and 2nd seeded in the division. They faced the San Jose Sharks but lost to them in 5 games. On June 16, 2016, the Kings named Anze Kopitar the 14th captain in team history, replacing Dustin Brown, who had led the team for the past 8 seasons.